Welcome to a special Common Space interview with Paul Mason, writer, journalist, author of a new book, Clear Bright Future, which explores the case for a kind of radical humanism in our current troubled times. Could you just briefly sum up the main argument of the book in relation to that demand for a kind of new humanist ethos in this period?
Well, look, I've written it because I think we're in bigger trouble than we want to admit. That we, Western societies, face an economic model that doesn't work for most people. We've got failing and evaporating consent for democracy, the rule of law, and universal human rights. And we've got the beginnings of what I call in the book algorithmic control, the whole Facebook, Cambridge Analytica phenomenon, where governments and states and rogue states are able to use the beginnings of artificial intelligence, just the beginnings, to control our behaviour and so even our thoughts. Now, to me, reporting this as it morphed from one thing to another, from economics to politics to social crisis to technological challenge, it became clear to me that something deeper was happening. And what I call it in the book is the crisis of the neoliberal self. The crisis of the neoliberal system has become a crisis of the neoliberal subject. The kind of person that was created in the last 30 years turns out to be very ill-equipped to deal with this economic, an era of economic despair, and ill-equipped to deal with actually defending the principles on which Western civilization, developed world civilization, so let's include Japan, let's include, all the developed world, the principles on which that is based, and very powerless in the face of technology. The postmodernist philosopher Michel Foucault, who I'm heavily critical of in the book, nevertheless sums up very well what we would become in the neoliberal era, entrepreneurs of the self, anti-collectivists, dog eat dog in a dog eat dog world, and the price we paid for that is we became, as Foucault calls it, eminently governable. And I think if we are to fight back in favour of democracy, in favour of a new economic model, in favour of human autonomy against machines, using the machines for human good, but actually for our own autonomy, we need to fight for the 360-degree self that we have lost. And so the focus of the book, many of my previous books have been about what do we do politically, what do we do in economic policy. This is about what do we do to rediscover concepts through which we can defend our humanness.
And I think it's obviously a pertinent question today, articulated in some ways by the rise of the alt-right, in different ways. I mean, I'm not impressed by someone like Jordan Peterson as an intellectual, but I think he is supplying a certain need in the population for identity, a sense of personal integrity, a sense of personal autonomy, perhaps. Does the left have something, or the radical forces in society have something distinctive to say to people who are in that quest?
Well, look, Jordan Peterson is providing a survival manual for people who believe in biological hierarchy. That alpha males are better than beta males, that all males are better than women, that all white people are better than all black people. He doesn't say it overtly, but it's a survival manual for what happens when the dog-eat-dog world becomes a jungle. Okay? Put your head up, look into the distance and become like a male lobster. Well, I find this risible, to be honest. But my book is not a kind of alter Jordan Peterson. It's not a kind of what you would do if you were imitating, not a lobster but something else. It's what you would do if you were imitating a 360-degree human being, i.e. being human. And it's not a set of glib rules. There's a lot of them around. There's a lot of books on the airport bookshelves telling you that you are already not human, that you're already an algorithm. This is Yuval Noah Harari. My book is trying to say, look, humanism is the basis of the Enlightenment, of developed world civilization. I want to defend that. I think we could lose it, or I think the sources of being able to lose it are, as I say, an economy that just drives people to despair, that goes backwards in terms of human development. We are seeing now, in places where I come from, Wigan in England, you're seeing, the life expectancy of men is 12 years less than the life expectancy of rich people in southern England. So human development can go backwards. We're seeing this week abortion being completely outlawed in the state of Alabama in the United States. So to save it, you need to both return to and revive that on which it was based. And for me, radical humanism is Marxism. The Marx of 1844 in Paris, he sits down and he writes. What's the first thing he writes? The only thing I would, the thing that I would drag from a burning building is not Das Kapital and it's not the Communist Manifesto first. I'd certainly drag them from a burning building. But the first thing I would drag from a burning building, we're in a library, written by Marx, was the 1844 manuscripts where he says, humans possess a species being. So we are, and I think this definition of humanity has survived incredibly well through 180 years of developed, evolutionary anthropology and biology. We evolved as an accident. There's no design. No one pressed the button. No one sort of designed us. We evolved a handful of species like us, of which we are the survivor, and we survived probably because we developed language, cooperation, and imagination. And these are not add-ons to our DNA; they are in our DNA. What does that then mean? It means that a theory of human nature, from a Marxist point of view, is one that human nature is socially changeable. We can change ourselves, we can change our environment. And on the basis of that, it is likely, I don't say inevitable, the classic almost religious Marxism says it's inevitable that human beings liberate themselves. I think it's likely that through imagination, cooperation, language and technology, at some point we will liberate ourselves both from our own ignorance and from the material necessities that have held us back for thousands of years. So that is called in philosophy a teleological viewpoint. It says humans have a trajectory. We are going somewhere, and that is the most consistent non-religious humanism that I think has ever been invented by human thought. And in the book, I wanted to, for this time, defend it and explain what I think it means.
So what does the young Marx then, because this of course is like a seminal argument about Marx, that there's a young Marx and a later Marx. I don't want to go into all those intense debates, but what does the young Marx then, what does that tell us about the sort of radical politics we should have now?
Well, look, I go even further than all these people who say, well, this was just a hangover from the Enlightenment. I say, yes, it was, absolutely, and good, because what Marx did when he was writing his humanist writings, and I think his humanism pervades his whole work, but there is, as we'll come to, another Marx that I think needs to be criticised, okay? That Marx brings Enlightenment philosophy into the era of strikes and revolutions, okay? So I mean, I think that's the first thing that he does. He also intimates that the outcome of human development can be freedom before he's even discovered the proletariat. Okay. Now later he discovers the proletariat, and not much later, and it's already there in his thinking. But there's a key aspect of what you might call orthodox Marxism, which is because the proletariat has no property, it must liberate itself from property, therefore it must overthrow capitalism, therefore it is the agent of history. I and other Marxist humanists believe that humanity is the agent of history, that you can make a prediction and a supposition about the future irrespective of whether the proletariat exists, is strong, has class consciousness. And as viewers and listeners may know from my previous work, I've already said in Post-Capitalism and in previous work, I think that the proletariat has been replaced and improved on, in a way, as the agent of history by what some sociologists call the networked individual. That everybody exploited and oppressed by capitalism is capable of overthrowing it, and they will do so consciously, not as an unconscious kind of blind watchmaker of history, doing the job of history, irrespective of what's in their heads. I never, even when I was like an orthodox Marxist, I always found that very difficult, because I come from a working class background where just as the workers Marx met in the 1840s, my dad and granddad and grandma were people who had ideas about social liberation for poor people, and some of them were Marxist and some of them were, to be honest, Christian leftism. But I never thought there was any need for the working class to do all this blindly. It would do it because it got in its head it wanted to do something. Now, as it turns out, before it could do that, I think capitalism managed to disperse and atomize that working class in my lifetime. And I think that it is now up to a much more diffuse set of people to take the next steps, which I think need to be very, very prompt in suppressing the market, to take control of the energy system, to stop fascism, stop the alt-right, stop the breakup of the global system, stop Trump attacking Venezuela and Iran, on a whim. These matters are urgent, but I'm not sitting there waiting either for the classic, male, white, manual working class, which is now about 17% of the population, nor am I waiting for it all to be done by the new working class, the global south, in the factories. It will, the concept of the social factory, invented by Italian Marxists in the 1960s and 70s, appeals to me. We are all in a factory. The factory is the world around us. Everything we do is creating value and profit for rich people, and we can find them everywhere by resisting that.
Surely the working class as a social class, as all social classes do, it takes on a certain formation in a given period. When the economic system changes, that formation breaks down, and then it reformulates through other economic situations. But surely the point of radicals in intervening into that situation is to inform as much as possible that development, that reformulation of the working class. And assuming that with the young Marx, you think that democracy and freedom is a vital component of that struggle. Looking at contemporary situations, how does that fit with some of the big democratic questions we face in Britain today? I want to go on to Scottish independence in a minute because I think it's instructive. But what about, for example, what's going on down south with the surge of the Brexit party? I mean, a bit in Scotland, but more so down south. Haven't they really tapped into something, a very deep-seated democratic impulse in society, which is an understanding that working class democratic rights were hard fought for by the working class, and the elite and the rich and the state administration has always resented those democratic rights and is happy to assuage them with something like a people's vote.
Yeah, you see, I think that's a misreading of the situation. First of all, in England, the supporters of Brexit, and certainly of hard Brexit, is the middle class. Now, it's not to say that they're not stressed and that there aren't working class supporters. All the evidence, and it's the same with Trump. It's not the poorest Americans who support Trump. It's the stressed middle class. I'd also say that what the Brexit Party expresses, we'll come to the democratic deficit bit in a minute, but it does express a reactionary, nostalgic cultural warfare by sections of English society. Actually, it is English society. If you see, Farage was in Merthyr Tydfil this week, and they couldn't, they fit into 3 bays of a car park, the people who came to see him. I think the phenomenon of the Brexit Party is a mixture of the authoritarian conservative right, the far right, and fascism. That's what it is. Even there, because you've also got EDL fascism, you've also got UKIP moving towards fascism, you've also got people in that wider Brexit Party who absolutely believe the same things. The Brexit Party is a function of the collapsing moral and ideological defences of liberal conservatism. It can't defend itself against right-wing thought. No, it is true that there is a democratic problem, and particularly in England, English radicalism has always been based on sovereignty and natural rights, going right back to the Peasants' Revolt and to the English Civil War, to the Levellers. The idea that you are born free, born with certain rights, and that that democracy resides in the sovereignty of you.
Isn't that worth defending and redeveloping for this period and the crisis of globalisation?
I think it is. Well, remember, in its particularly English form, it is difficult to achieve, even in a benign globalisation situation. So, suppose the EU was, going well. It had a socialist majority. It was enacting social justice platforms, etc. You would still be trading sovereignty for a large market. In the sense that what particularly triggered this democratic radicalism and led it in a right-wing direction, I think, was migration, the free movement. And let me explain how I think that it played, particularly, again, in the places where the Brexit Party and UKIP have been strong. People always ask, why is there so much hostility to migration when the people coming are white and mainly Christian, okay? And you can't really see much by way of wage suppression. Well, the first question is, there is wage suppression, but in sectors and places. Second thing is, it's not so much that it suppresses the wages, it adds to the general pressures of all neoliberal policies, which have pushed wages down anyway. So, but then I would say, on top of that, culturally, and I wrote about this in a chapter I contributed to another book called The Great Regression, which is published in a lot of different languages. It's not really economics. It's the problem of suddenly the British elite had 2.7 million workers with no vote, i.e. something they always wanted, that is wanted ever since 1865 when it had to give workers the vote. People could sense that a workforce was being created that had incomplete civil rights. Now, whether it's cause or consequence, when I was here in Scotland in 2014, one of the most obvious things was, and I think this, it was very easily accepted by Scottish voters that people who lived here for 6 months could vote in the referendum. So I met Bulgarians and Poles who were voting in the referendum. It's particularly acute, I think, in England, that people feel that in addition to the economics being stacked against them, i.e. people who were already stressed, they felt this was the first wave of migration in which you weren't required to participate fully in civil society. Many Polish migrants I met wanted to participate. They would dearly love to vote. Some of them wanted to be in the British Army. They say, I'll join up. My granddad was in the RAF, so I'd gladly be British. But they were never required to be by the European ethos of citizenship. Now, I think it was always possible, and for most working class people it still is the case, that their reaction to that situation was to go, we should reform Europe. But no reforms of Europe were ever offered. And so instead, it went down a reactionary path. And I do see the Brexit Party, despite the existence of a few sort of general sort of lefties within it, as wholly reactionary. The idea that you're going to stand without policies is a classic way in which Caudeism, which authoritarian right-wing politics always begins. And let me just say, why don't they need policies? Because everybody knows they hate ethnic minorities. You don't even need to say it. It's just there. It's in every sinew of what Nigel Farage has done since he walked down the street alongside the fascists in the 1970s, is that he just does not like migration. So you don't need to have a policy. The fearful thing is then there's nothing to hold them to. It becomes an empty vessel for all the right-wing fantasies of people about what they're going to do about migration. That's the real fear with the Brexit.
It's hardly the case, though, that anti-migrant feeling is new in that scenario. Marx talked about the impact of Irish labour and how that was used to undermine the English working class. But it's also not the problem that the right-wing direction that you talk about that Brexit's taken is because of the absence of left-wing leadership. When you joined the Labour Party when you were 19, I believe, it was a Eurosceptic party. Yeah. Then and for some time after. Today, that tradition has largely dissipated. And what that has done is, because an important point of this argument is what the EU actually is, not just the kind of incidental politics around it of who supports what.
Yeah.
The European Union is straightforwardly an instrument of the ruling class. It's undemocratic. It's not just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic. It attacks democracies, as you witnessed in Greece, and I did as well. So is it not important to have a left that can, and one of the things you touch on in the book, I know, is the sort of radical potential of truth that a lot of philosophers speak about. It's important the left is a truthful force.
Yeah.
It's important that the left says to people, the European Union is a nasty organisation, it's against us, and there is no clear plan by which it can be reformed. And had the left said that for several years in the run-up to the referendum, the left would now have a very strong stake in that public anger.
So I think let's take some of that apart. I think for me, the European Union is both a neoliberal construct. That's what it became from Thatcher onwards. From '86, when Thatcher imposed the single market as part of the deal for remaining engaged with them, it has become the tool of neoliberal global capital. It is in many ways worse than a sovereign state like the federal government of the United States, because there is a gap in sovereignty between it. Technically, all the sovereignty that Britain hands to Brussels goes to Brussels, but in fact it doesn't. It relinquishes sovereignty, but Brussels doesn't exert sovereignty, i.e. over major corporations in the way that it should. And corporations run riot in this space between national governments and Brussels. That's what Europe became. Now, in addition, the Lisbon Treaty was a massive mistake. Maastricht and Lisbon will kill Europe as a concept, while as long as they are allowed to exist. I have always wanted, and I think I don't recall. I think it was very strongly argued on the British left that the Maastricht Treaty was terrible, and it's just a boon we got during the Blair Brown era that we were able to resist joining the euro, in which we would be under Maastricht. Maastricht is a recipe, for those who don't know it, for austerity. It is an inbuilt austerity, and it creates a central bank that is not properly under the sovereignty even of the state that it represents. If you go in the Bank of England and say to people in the Bank of England, your bank is not really independent; it's part of the British state. They'll say, of course it is. We get our orders from the British state, but not the European Central Bank. That's the first problem. Lisbon Treaty wrote neoliberalism into a constitution. So a 25-year-old system that was always going to need to be replaced at some point, and needs to be replaced now, is irreplaceable. You can't remove it. That's what's wrong with Europe. However, what is positive about the European Union is that it is part of the multilateral global order. And because we live in a period where I think it's possible that the multilateral global order falls apart in a chaotic way, in a way that exactly exacerbates tensions between peoples, nations, ethnicities, etc. I don't revel in the collapse of the multilateral order. So I would, even now, advocate for Labour to have a remain and transform position. So if we could, we'd go in, we'd stay in, we would have a second referendum, we'd defeat whatever deal was on offer, we'd stay in, and we'd say, not as a condition of staying in, it's simply we're staying in, and we're going to try and fight alongside our colleagues on the left in Podemos, even Syriza, in it with its... That's me, isn't it? Even Syriza wants to reform the Lisbon Treaty, and so do we. So let's reform it. That's where I would go. I think the idea that by escaping from one form of the multilateral order into its next layer, which is the WTO, that you escape neoliberalism is wrong. The WTO, and also if you want to nationalise things, when Labour nationalises the energy system, I believe it will come to power, and I hope it will do so with some kind of arrangement or alliance with the SNP. I hope that the progressive parties of Britain will take control of the commanding heights of the economy, and when they do, it won't be Europe, i.e. the European Union. It'll be the European Court of Human Rights, entirely separate from the European Union, that comes after you for nationalisation. So neoliberalism is layer upon layer of deregulatory agreement, and we have to fight it all.
When you said there that you wouldn't make reform a condition of staying in, I mean, isn't that because, and I've heard people say this before, it's because there's not much of an expectation of that reform working out?
Well, there's not much of an expectation, but remember, for this country that we have right now, the United Kingdom, however long it lasts, we have an opt-out from Schengen, we have an opt-out from the euro, we have an opt-out from the budget as well. I mean, amazingly, Cameron secured, and I think we could secure again, an opt-out from ever closer union. That's what Cameron secured, and I think that was the most significant thing that he secured. So we are always going to be semi-detached, and I think a progressive government in Britain can take advantage of the semi-detachment. We look right now, British Steel, which is Scunthorpe and a few plants here in Scotland, is under threat of closure because it can't meet its bills. The government's propping British Steel up right now. We got into that position partly because Europe didn't care about a systemic defence and extension and reindustrialisation of its manufacturing base, and partly because successive neoliberal governments in Britain didn't care about steel. They let it go. They handed it to the highest bidder, and that's why we lost the Redcar Steelworks in Northern England. So the thing is that if you have a government that really wants to, as I think Labour would do, reindustrialise Britain, you'll clash with Europe again and again. But Europe will never. The European Union will have never really experienced this. There's never been. Even Germany's quite happy for austerity and offshoring to strip away that kind of, the so-called banana, the Rhineland model. It's all been moved offshore. A lot of it has been moved offshore into, when I say offshore, I mean obviously to China, but also to northern Hungary, Slovakia. The Germans haven't defended their model. France is incapable of defending its model. The first time you get one of these ex-imperialist countries with a serious financial centre actually going to Brussels saying, no, we're going to reindustrialise, we're going to green, we're going to stop the social dumping by other countries on us aggressively, I think the game will change in Europe. But look, that in terms of my book, what I'm trying to argue there is not just a set of policies. It's an ethos through which, what kind of ethos does the left have to have? And coming from the United States at the moment, that one of the reactions you're getting is a kind of revival of economic nationalism. Bill Mitchell and Thomas Fazzi reclaiming the state. They're right that the nation is the best, is the most operative unit of democracy. That they're right there. What they're wrong to do is to advocate the breakup of the global system as a result.
One final question about Scottish independence, because I think it's one that throws into relief the crisis of globalisation. And you were up in Scotland for that referendum. You were a friend of the Radical Independence Campaign, and so on. What is being argued now in the right of the independence movement is kind of independence by parcelling away your sovereignty. Independence through NATO, independence through the EU, independence through keeping Stalin. So parcelling away sovereignty to London, Washington, Brussels, etc. Doesn't this highlight the really dangerous position that the left is in terms of how do we root democratic practices if we are involved in that process? A journalist in Scotland, and I'll paraphrase him because he might be watching this, Kenny Farquharson, described this as, the way he put it was, national sovereignty is neither possible nor desirable in the 21st century. Now, I'm worried that if the left goes around saying things like that, and the right are saying you need nationalism to have democracy, their argument will be the one that wins out.
Well, it'd be interesting because I think in a globalised world, national sovereignty is always traded away for access. It's as simple as that. If you want to have a common standard for the toaster that everybody buys down at Argos or at the local supermarket, then there has to be a supranational body that oversees the safety standard of the toaster that you just bought. That's what you get with a common market. Now, in the Scottish instance, I'm critical, obviously, of the Growth Commission report. I think the Growth Commission report is trading austerity for sovereignty. That's what that's doing. It's saying we can never, we'll accept an element of fiscal restraint for a long time because we need to get out of the United Kingdom. No, however, even despite that criticism, I think it's entirely possible that the logical thing for Scots to do would be to leave the UK at any cost if it becomes a right-wing hellhole full of mad people chasing around picketing halal kebab shops. Right, because that's entirely possible if we lose, if the English and Welsh left loses. First thing, as to sterling, what I wouldn't simply hope, but I'm fighting for within the British Labour Party, is that if we form a Labour government, that the offer should be to Scotland whether, first of all, of a penalty-free secession. Should the Scottish people decide in a majority referendum to be independent, then the advantage of having a Labour government should be that there is a penalty-free secession. I know Bank of England rattling the cages saying you're doomed, like that guy in Dad's Army, no government briefing the press that that there'll be border patrols on day one and all this that happened in 2014. So if we can de-escalate the tension over that, then there becomes a rational debate in Scotland over what I would hope that Labour would advocate, which is a maximum devolution, including fiscal autonomy, everything except foreign policy and defence. Okay, no, I know a lot of Scottish nationalists would be against that, but I think it is rational for a Labour government to offer maximum devolution. It's another thing to convince the Scottish Labour Party to adopt that. But if Scots, in the end, and a rising generation of Scots do not want to do that, and I think the ones I interviewed in 2014 when they were 16 years old, probably 18, 20 years old now, probably even less want to do Devo Max, then we need to facilitate the breakup. And here's my difference with the kind of Russia Today Sputnik faction of Scottish nationalism. I would want, first of all, Britain to offer a sterling union. So if you can offer a sterling union as a transitional measure, you can say, of course, in the end, when you gain fiscal autonomy and everything calms down, and you decide how much you want to burn the oil that's in the North Sea and screw the planet, etc. There may be the basis for either the euro, which I think is pretty logical, to be honest, or a Scottish currency, fine. But in the interim, let's have a sterling union, and let's have a Scottish seat on the Bank of England. Let's have a common monetary pot. Let's have a monetary union of two countries. One. Two, it's up to the Scottish people whether they want to be in NATO. Absolutely. I would like to convince them to be in it because I want to reform NATO. I look at what Vladimir Putin is doing in the east of Europe, and I look at what he does, what his Air Force does every day, which is, to fly towards your airspace, which is what it will be if you become independent. And I do want for Western democracies to have a defence mechanism against what he is doing, which is hybrid warfare to break up Western democracy. Now, fine if people don't want to do that, but that. When people call me like pro-NATO, I'm not pro-NATO. I think it's a terrible organisation that's done terrible things. But I think it too can be reformed. Or you do it through the European Union space. The European Union has a dormant security and defence policy. The European Union needs to activate that security and defence policy. And I think it is inevitable that Scotland, if it were to be independent, would be inside the European Union. And you may want to do it through that. However way you do it, as a country of what would it be, 6 million people, with you've got some pretty hefty, pretty historically feisty regiments and military formations in this country. You'd have an army, and you could contribute to whatever you wanted to contribute to. But I think I see it happening. To be honest, maybe not in my lifetime. I see Scottish independence happening, and it then behoves on the English left to try and find mechanisms and means for us, because we've never, in the period of the working class and the period of socialism, i.e. in the last 200 years, we haven't experienced England and Scotland being separate entities. So we need to find a modus operandi to work with the future Scottish working class, the future Scottish progressive population, to struggle against the common enemy, because for absolutely certain, just as much as Tesco, is the same company in Ireland as it is in England, Tesco or whatever it will be, with the same company here as it will be. The steel industry will be the same steel industry. The major outsourcing corporations will operate here in Glasgow and in London, and we have to. It's in our common interest to fight them on behalf of Labour against capital.
We're running way over time,
but
I need to ask one last question, which is, do you not want to see Scottish independence be a breach in the Western order? I mean, you're talking about reforming NATO. No,
I don't, because I think that's be very careful. when I talk to these kind of security guys, the spooks in London, they are all too keen to stigmatise the Scottish independence project as a project of the Kremlin. They will. I mean, you'll know the slanders they've made against Salmond and others on that. I think no, I don't want to breach the Western order. I do want to reform it. I hate what it's done in the Middle East. I don't want any more expeditionary wars. But I do not see any progress from the point of view of a country with a democratic tradition, that's Scotland, and a tradition of Enlightenment thinking going back longer than England's. I don't see any advantage for them to become the puppet government of Vladimir Putin, and I'm very sure that very few people actually in Scotland do want that to happen.
Well, lots there, but we have to leave it there. Thanks very much
pleasure.
for a wide-ranging discussion. I hope the book does well. I understand it is doing well.
I hope so.
And you're launching it today at this beautiful library in Glasgow.
Yeah.
Thanks
you
very much.
Cheers.